So I've gathered you to speak about mixing skin tones. This is yellow ochre, right? Can I have one of those napkins, please? Thank you. When you're mixing skin tones, you want to make sure that your palette knife is clean. Really, the palette knife is the best way to do this. This is Alizarin Crimson. This is Mars Black. When you're using oil paint, I tend to use ivory black, but I've never seen ivory black available in like acrylic version. I'm sure it probably exists. And then usually I use a titanium white when it's oil paint. I don't know if this is titanium white, is it?
I think it is.
Yeah. So with these 4 colors, well, my professor calls them 2 because they say that white is all colors and black is the absence of color. So technically they're not colors, right? Like if you ask, well, what color is the light in here? It's got a bunch of colors in it, so it's hard to say. With these 2 colors, my professor would say, which is alizarin crimson and yellow ochre, you can create any skin tone. But I've come to realize that this is just kind of like the starter set, right? Because then it varies. But there's a couple of things you do have to understand about skin, and it's that it tends to be warm. If you remember our color wheels, right? We had warm and cool colors. So the warm colors are yellow, orange, and red. Cool colors are blue, green, and violet. Now skin can become cool, but that's usually when you have a bruise or when the person is deceased. So if you look at some of Caravaggio's work, which is a famous painter, he was famous for painting Jesus, but like dead. Everybody else before was like, he was still alive, very vibrant colors, well, very warm colors. And then along comes Caravaggio and he's like blue and green, you know? Okay, so it's pretty straightforward and you're gonna kind of mix these. So first we'll start with yellow ochre and white, right? And we'll see what that does. And whenever you're using a palette knife, it's advisable to keep a napkin close to you, because now we're gonna do kind of the same thing with alizarin crimson and white, and we don't wanna mix any of this color into it. Also, when you're mixing colors, mix in small batches. One of the biggest mistakes that students make, so like I was saying is, now we're gonna clean it because we don't want that color to get mixed up in there. And we're gonna do the same thing with alizarin crimson. Now, as you learn more about painting, which I think you guys have some experience, my professor, for the sake of communication, he would talk about the different personalities that different colors have. So he calls yellow ochre the friendly neighbor because it kind of gets along with everybody. Alizarin crimson, not so much. So alizarin crimson tends to want to take over, right? It's a very strong color. Same thing with Prussian blue. So now we're going to mix that, right? So how do you know you're starting to get a skin tone? The only way to really know is to do a comparison. So let's say this mix of yellow ochre and white, I'm gonna get some on the palette knife, and then I'm gonna blur my vision and I'm gonna compare like this, right? And if it starts to blend into your skin, when you blur your vision, it should kind of dissipate. So we're way off as far as this. Now, like I said before, well, I said a couple of things. I think I was saying that one of the mistakes that beginners do is that they don't mix small amounts. Remember that we're experimenting to try to discover or try to find out what the combinations do. And the combinations are not limitless, but I mean, they kind of are, right? Because when you start discussing quantity, so my professor also used to say, well, the KFC's 12 secret recipes, right? It's not really a secret. You have salt, pepper, et cetera, et cetera. But the question is how much salt, right? So it's hard to gauge how much salt. You can't use a ton of salt or it's going to get out of control, right? So in that sense, this is limitless because how much white do we use, right? And I've discovered that you have to go case by case basis. You can't just have a recipe, right? Because depending on Whether you're inside or whether you're outside, whether you have a spotlight or not, your own skin tone may be different. So we go back to the expression, draw what you see, not what you know, right? Don't take anything for granted. And then I was saying that one of the mistakes that beginners do is they'll get the whole batch and they'll just mix it all together. I say, oh, I need more white. And then they get all of that white and they mix it all together. And, oh, I need more white. Instead of doing kind of these micro experiments, which is what you guys should be doing. Make sense? Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing with the black. And this is just going to make a gray, right? Black and white. Gray is your friend whenever you're painting, because you can have warm grays, you can have cool grays, right? You can have a red gray, you can have an orange gray, you can have a blue gray, you can have a green gray. It could kind of adopt to all the other colors. And I think it's really the only one that can do that as well as it does. It's hard to say having a green violet. You could, but it's a little bit different, you know? It's not so clear. Okay, we're going to take yellow ochre and black. And finally, we're going to take yellow ochre and red. Make sure it's on camera. I'm sorry, we're going to take Alizarin Crimson and black. We still do need to do yellow ochre and Alizarin Crimson. This is a beautiful color for people who have a darker skin tone. I love it. Right? That's Alizarin Crimson and black. That's too dark for me. Let's do Alizarin Crimson and yellow ochre. And where should we do that? Do it over here. Now, of course, once you kind of have it established what a person's skin tone generally is, like my skin tone is never going to be this, right? Maybe if we turn off lights, right? So it depends, I guess, even then. But you're typically just working on one painting, and in modern day, we work off of photographs, and the photograph isn't changing that much, but you do have to be careful, because if the lighting where you're watching or looking at the photograph changes, then the colors will change. Now, this is not just how to mix skin tone. This is how to gauge any color, right? And there's two things that you do when you're trying to gauge color. You need to determine the temperature, and we've already talked about how living people are warm, typically. If I have that screen on, right, and it's a blue screen, that blue is going to be reflected in all of your faces, right? So typically, these are guidelines, not rules set in stone. And then we need to determine the value, right? So it's one thing to know that something is red, right? But you have maroon and then you have like pink, right? So where within that does it fall? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at my own skin tone, right? And I think I lean more towards like yellow orangish than red. Right? So let's pick up a little bit more yellow ochre, though we're running a little bit dry over here. All right. So I'm going to kind of take this mix of yellow ochre and alizarin crimson. And it's never what you think it is, right? So it's always better to test it, because you might see that and say, well, that's too bright for you. And you might be right, but it's not as bright as you think, because by simultaneous contrast, here on the gray palette, it looks much brighter than it does on my skin. Does that make sense? And you know what? I think I'm going to dull that down with a bit of gray, because I want to decrease the value, right? So the gray will decrease the value, and it will make it a bit more bland as well. So it'll decrease the intensity of it. So we're going to do a little bit of gray. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to match my skin tone right now. And remember, we're doing like little micro experiments. And now you look at that and say, well, that's too gray. and you're right, right? So I'm going to gather this up and I'm going to separate it. And I'm going to get a little bit more. And I'm just going to go right into the old mixture, right? I'm not even going to add any more of this because it's already sitting on the palette. That looks like a much more realistic skin tone, right? But that's too dark. So now we need to brighten it. The question is, how do we brighten it? I think that this white and yellow ochre mixture might be good for brightening it while still maintaining the warmth. I feel like if I use white, which is typically what rookie students will jump to, it might make it too gray, right? So we're going to use the yellow ochre / titanium white mixture. And here, I'm not going to mix it into the whole thing. I'm just going to mix it into a corner to see what happens. Now blur your vision. That might work for a person who has a lighter skin tone than I do, right? But that's a skin tone, right? Not quite me, needs to be more orange. So I could do a couple of things. I know that I already have some yellow ochre in this batch. I could jump to a little bit of Alizarin Crimson or a little bit more of this. It depends. So if I were to do Alizarin Crimson, remember that it tends to want to take over. This is already kind of orangish. So I'm just going to take a little bit, right? Blur your vision. That's much closer. Make sense? Right? Still not quite there. I still think it needs to be a little bit more orange. So I am going to jump to the Alizarin Crimson if I have a little bit, which I don't have that much. But you don't need that much Alizarin Crimson sometimes. But I do need a little bit more than that. So I'm going to go back into my base here. Now it's important to be careful here. Remember what I said about Alizarin Crimson taking over. If you use too much, it'll take over the whole thing. So I just scraped it off and there's still some on my palette and that's what I'm going to use first. It's like squeezing, and you got to be careful because the other side had some on too. Squeezing the toothpaste out of the tube, right? You can squeeze it out, but you can't put it back in. When you're doing skin tones or mixing, I can always add more, but I can't take away. So if it's too light, then I can add more, right? I think we need to decrease the value a little bit. So I'm going to take there's a couple of ways to do that. I could use this, which I don't remember what this combination is. This is yellow ochre and black, right? But I'm going to take this one because I like it and it still keeps the warmth, okay? I'm not going to take that much because I only want to decrease the value a little bit. By the way, sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes you add a mixture and it goes sideways. It goes in the completely opposite direction. And you got to try to pull it back or you got to try to start over. Now, I'm a student like you. I'm just a little bit further up the ladder. But I also make these mistakes. Blur your vision. Right? Now let's add some more warmth. Maybe a little bit more yellow ochre. Never take for granted because right now in my mind, I'm like, okay, maybe I need more yellow ochre looking at it on the palette. That would be a mistake, right? You always want to compare it to your skin and then make your decision because the palette can fool you. Blur your vision. Does it blend away? That's my skin tone. All right. But that's just the base. Because even when you look at my hand, there's different areas that are lighter and darker depending on the shadow or depending on where my blood vessels are, right? Even when you're looking at a picture, you want to do this, right? And you want to make sure that the lighting is consistent so it doesn't suddenly change. All right, before I let you go, I'd like to do the back of my hand because just to show you too. Now, once you have that as a base, like I said, in order to get the areas that are brighter red, like right here around my knuckle, you just add a little bit of alizarin crimson to that, or a little bit of red to that if you have another red on your palette. Okay? All right. Let's see. This seems like a beautiful color for like lips or something, especially if somebody's wearing a lipstick. It's probably not a natural lip. We're going to try to do the bottom of my hand. Way too bright. You could take this mixture and see what happens. That's actually really good. So just lightening my skin tone, and I could probably lighten it a little bit more, and maybe a little bit of white. Notice the amounts that I'm using, okay? I think maybe that's too much. But let's see. Yeah, that's too much. See, so I went too far. In the event that you do go too far, you want to try to bring it back. The question is how. Take a little bit of our black and alizarin crimson mixture, which I really like. Remember how dominating alizarin crimson is, and black is also a dominant color. And even that small amount, look at what it did. Right? This was yellow ochre and white. I think we need a little bit more of that. That's what we started with for this. We pretty much just used this and this mixture that we had created of my skin tone, right? Okay, we're gonna just get some of it off. We're gonna keep some on with a palette knife. It's a little bit better. It's lacking a bit of warmth. I think that this might be too red. I might need to push it back towards orange. Actually, that's not bad. That's actually not bad. You see, that's why you don't make assumptions on your own. You typically want to compare. I'd say that's pretty good. I think I could probably still use a little bit of yellow ochre. Maybe that's going to screw it up. No, there you go. So that's my palm, right? And that's not just skin tone. Whenever you're trying to mix color, you want to gauge the color temperature and then gauge the value. If it's a book on a shelf, if it's whatever, you kind of do it the same way. And that way, regardless of what type of paint you have, whether it's alizarin crimson or another red, right? It's still a warm red, right? Whether it's cadmium yellow or Indian yellow, it's still yellow. So you don't need to, well, I need that specific yellow because that's the one I use. No, you don't, right? You just need to understand the color temperature and the value and then play with the paints until you get there. Thank you guys. And I brought you here because you guys have the most potential, and I figured whether you use it now or later, it might be helpful to you. Okay?